Lola Harrison, a bright 12-year-old with a fire in her eyes, stood proudly in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare, clutching a sleek wooden case that held the heart and soul of her passion. A solar-powered drone she had painstakingly built over endless nights. The drone had earned her first place at her school's science fair, a triumph that she believed was the first step toward proving that she belonged in a world that too often seemed determined to cast her aside. Today was supposed to be a joyous day as she prepared to fly to Houston, a journey that would connect her to the family she loved and the promise of a new beginning. Instead, chaos erupted as blaring sirens and shouting voices tore through the calm of the bustling terminal. Just as Lola was soaking in the excitement of her achievement, two officers stormed in with guns drawn, accusing her in tones that carried an unspoken prejudice. In an instant, her treasured wooden case was shattered across the polished tile floor, the splintered remnants of her creation glistening harshly under the cold fluorescent lights. The officer leading the charge was none other than Captain Victor Hensley, a man whose imposing 6-foot frame and meticulously crisp white uniform radiated authority. His graying buzz cut and chiseled features left no doubt he was accustomed to exerting power, but it was his gaze, narrow and distrustful, that cut the deepest. He looked at Lola with an intensity that seemed to boil down to suspicion, his eyes fixed on her as if she were somehow unworthy of the pride and hope she carried. The surrounding travelers stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to muted agreement as whispers filled the air. Lola's heart pounded like a drum in her ears as she tried to muster the courage to speak. Despite the whirlwind of confusion, her voice came out steady and clear. "What is going on? I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her words slicing through the murmurs. Yet no one in the crowd dared to challenge the captain's authority. Instead, murmurs grew louder, and eyes continued to judge her every move. Captain Hensley strode forward with the swagger of a man who believed he controlled fate itself. "That case," he declared in a low, gravelly voice, pointing directly at the wreckage with a thick finger. "It is oversized and looks like a weapon. What is a kid like you doing hauling something like that through my terminal?" His tone was laced with disdain and an undercurrent of racial bias, an unwarranted assumption that Lola's achievements were too ambitious for someone like her. Standing there, Lola felt the sting of injustice more sharply than any physical pain could inflict. Refusing to let the fear swallow her whole, she squared her shoulders and answered, "It's not a weapon. It is my science project, a drone that I built with my own 2 hands. I won first place at school, and I'm just taking it to Houston." Her words rang with both pride and defiance. Yet, as the officer's sneer deepened, it was clear that his mind was made up before she even uttered a word. His dismissive gesture swept away her months of meticulous effort, reducing her hard work to nothing more than a suspicious contraption. The tension in the terminal escalated as another officer, Officer Tate, stepped in with a scowl on his hardened face. His presence, formidable and unwavering, only served to amplify the sense of impending injustice. "Cleared, huh? We'll see about that," he muttered, his hand hovering near his weapon as if ready to seize any excuse to enforce his own brutal version of order. Meanwhile, Officer Mills, noticeably younger and less certain, fidgeted with his radio, his nervous eyes betraying his inner conflict as he looked between Lola and the imposing captain. In that moment, Lola's mind raced with memories of past humiliations. She recalled the cruel taunts and jeers from classmates who had mocked her for being the only black girl in the robotics club, remarks that had once seemed like distant echoes of a harsh reality. Yet, even as the echoes of prejudice flooded back, Lola's determination did not waver. "I am not lying," she insisted with a tremor of both fear and resolve. "This is my project. It is my passion. I have worked hard to build it, and it is not a threat but a symbol of my dreams." Her plea hung in the air as if it were a prayer for the fairness she so desperately sought. But Captain Hensley was unyielding. With a cold smirk that spoke of undisguised contempt, he leaned in closer, his voice dripping with authority and cruelty. I don't need to ask anyone. I'm the one keeping this place safe, and you are a risk." The weight of his words struck Lola like a physical blow. Being labeled a risk felt not only like an accusation of wrongdoing, but as a judgment on her very identity. A harsh reminder that her skin color and youth made her a target in a system that prized conformity over courage. Before Lola could muster another word, Officer Tate moved swiftly, his grip seizing her arms and forcing her behind her back. Cold metal bit into her delicate skin as zip ties locked into place, each click echoing with an air of finality. The pain was sharp, yet what stung more was the violation of dignity and the crushing sense of betrayal. Officer Mills watched silently, his young eyes reflecting regret and shame as he briefly met Lola's pleading gaze before turning away. In that moment of captivity, Lola's soul ached under the weight of her lost dreams and the agony of being misunderstood. The once bright promise of her future seemed to crumble into dust. Her drone, the embodiment of her countless sacrifices, now lay in ruins because of a prejudice that would not be silenced. "You are wrong," she managed to cry out, her voice trembling with raw emotion and determination. "You will see that this is not the end." Yet, her words barely registered as she was dragged further into a cold, dim holding room. The sight of a sympathetic stranger, a woman in a red coat clutching her purse, stirred a flicker of hope in her bruised heart, though it was quickly quashed by the brutal reality of her situation. Inside the cramped cell, the air was heavy with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, a stark reminder of the institutional neglect and cold indifference that defined the very system meant to protect its people. Lola's eyes were drawn to the battered remains of her wooden case left behind on the terminal floor, a symbol of her shattered dreams and a testament to the profound injustice meted out to an innocent child. As she sat on the cold concrete floor, her voice grew soft yet resonant, speaking directly from the depths of her wounded spirit. "I made that drone with all my heart. I dreamed of showing the world what I could do. Now it is gone, and with it a part of me." Her words, meant to reach the hearts of every bystander, lingered in the room like a melancholy refrain. The injustice of that day was far from over. The oppressive weight of Captain Hensley's authority continued to reverberate in every corner of Lola's mind, igniting an inner fire fueled by betrayal and grief. Even as she sat in that holding cell, the promise of retribution was already stirring within her, an unspoken vow that someday she would rise from the ashes of this humiliation to reclaim her honor and exact a return that would shake the very foundations of the prejudiced system that had wronged her. In that moment, with her body trembling and her spirit battered, Lola Harrison silently promised that she would not remain a victim. She would fight, she would endure, and one day her comeback would be nothing short of magnificent, a testament to her unbreakable will and the enduring power of hope in the face of overwhelming injustice. Lola Harrison pleaded with all the strength in her voice, her eyes filled with desperation as she begged, "Please, just look inside first." But Officer Tate remained stone cold as he knelt by the door where a security guard had abandoned the shattered wooden case. With a swift, brutal flick of his wrist, he sliced through the leather straps that Lola had so carefully added for style, peeling the case open as if he were gutting a fish. Out tumbled the remains of her beloved drone, a twisted, mangled heap of metal and cracked plastic. The delicate solar panels lay shattered, and the hand-painted wings, once vibrant and full of promise, were now bent at grotesque angles as tiny gears scattered across the floor, clinking with a pitiful echo. Lola's breath caught in her throat as she remembered all the long nights spent perfecting every detail of her creation. Instead of seeing the beauty and ingenuity that went into her project, Tate's expression remained unmoved, as if destroying her dream was all part of the job. Captain Victor Hensley then entered the scene, his heavy boots thudding like the gavel of a judge as he surveyed the carnage with a sneer that dripped disdain. "Looks suspicious to me," he growled in a voice that left no room for debate as he glanced at the lifeless drone. Instead of examining the wreckage any further, He lifted one massive boot and brought it down hard on the drone's frame, crushing it into the cold concrete with a sickening crunch. The sound of the snapping wing echoed in Lola's ears like a gunshot, intensifying the injustice she felt. Overcome with anger and grief, she lunged forward, crying, "Stop! Why are you doing this?" But Officer Tate yanked her back with the same ruthless efficiency that had shattered her hopes. Hensley, still standing tall with arms crossed and that infuriating smirk, muttered with chilling nonchalance, "You should have known better." His words cut through her like a slap, erasing any trace of the months of hard work that had gone into building the drone, as if her identity and her dreams were insignificant. The air around Lola was thick with humiliation as the door creaked and a nervous security guard peered in, warning about the growing crowd and the constant filming on their phones. Hensley waved him off with condescending authority, declaring that he was in charge and that no one would disrupt his order. "You're lucky I don't haul you straight to juvie." He spat at Lola, his hazel eyes narrowing in pure disdain. Lola's heart pounded as she tried to muster the strength to defend her honor, insisting that her drone was not a threat but a symbol of her creativity and passion. Yet, her voice cracked under the weight of injustice, and Officer Tate roughly shoved her into a cold metal chair bolted to the floor, the harsh steel biting through her jeans and accentuating every wound left by the zip ties. Then, as if the moment could not worsen, a booming voice tore through the tension from the overhead speakers. "Release Lola Harrison now. This is Marcus Harrison, CEO of O'Hare." In an electrifying shockwave, her father burst into the room clad in a sharp navy suit, his tall, imposing figure and calm fury a stark contrast to the cruelty surrounding him. With a polished, ebony-handled pocket knife in hand, Marcus swiftly cut through the ties that bound his little girl. The officers froze in their tracks as Marcus's steely gaze and commanding presence transformed the scene. Lola clung to him as if he were her shield, her tears mixing with fierce relief and burning determination. As Marcus stepped forward to confront Captain Hensley, whose confident facade finally cracked into a vulnerable, slack-jawed stare, the air vibrated with the promise of retribution that was about to shake the very foundations of a system steeped in prejudice and cruelty. Lola Harrison's father, Marcus Harrison, his voice low and heavy with authority, fixed Captain Victor Hensley with a glare that could split concrete. "You detain my daughter without cause, in my airport," he said. His tone controlled but laden with fury. Lola, still reeling from the wreckage of her beloved drone and the shameful display of prejudice, watched as her dad towered over Hensley, who had so carelessly crushed her creation and branded her a threat simply because of the color of her skin. For a moment, Hensley's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his feeble excuse tumbling out. "I didn't know," he managed, his words weak and hollow. Marcus's eyes narrowed into dark pools of blazing anger. "You didn't know, and you didn't care. You saw a black girl with something you couldn't understand and you decided she was guilty. That is not ignorance, Hensley. That is you." His voice was not raised in volume but in sharpness, cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. Lola felt every word like a blow, realizing that the injustice she had endured was born of a deep-seated bias that had marked her from the start. Marcus pointed a steady, unforgiving finger at the trembling officer and declared, "You're done here, and I promise you that." The words, heavy with finality, reverberated in the room as Lola's heart surged with a mixture of anguish and pride. Here was her father, not just another worker, but the CEO of O'Hare, standing as a bulwark against the hatred that sought to diminish her. Outside the small room, the hallway erupted into a cacophony of protest. Travelers pressed against the glass, their faces contorted in shock and indignation as they recorded the unfolding drama on their smartphones. A woman's resolute shout of support and a man's pounding fist in the air blended together into a tidal wave of righteous anger that washed over Lola, momentarily lifting the crushing weight of her humiliation. Marcus's presence shone like a beacon in that dim corridor. "Let her go!" a voice cried out from the crowd as the noise grew into a roar of unity. Despite Hensley's earlier bravado, his shoulders slumped and his face went pale as he realized that he had unleashed a force he could not control. "I promise you she is under my protection now," Marcus said, guiding Lola toward the door with the protective assurance of a father defending his child. As they advanced, Lola stole one last glance over her shoulder and saw Hensley rooted to the spot, his once imposing stance now reduced to trembling uncertainty as he muttered, "This isn't over." But Marcus did not slow. With every determined step, he pushed the oppressive specter of hate further away from his daughter. Once in the safe confines of Marcus's executive suite, a bright modern haven overlooking the taxiing plains, Lola tried to steady her racing heart. She sat on a plush leather couch, still feeling the sting where the cold metal of the zip ties had bit into her skin, and attempted to reconcile the turbulent emotions swirling inside her. Marcus paced behind a towering window, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he ordered his legal team to file a lawsuit for defamation and wrongful detention. Amid the buzzing activity of a crisis unfolding on social media, a grainy video had emerged, twisting the truth into a monstrous lie. Messages branded Lola as dangerous, a liar, a threat, while hashtags like Honkiana the Threat splashed across screens nationwide. In that moment of chaos, as the weight of betrayal and manipulation threatened to crush her again, Marcus vowed, "We will fix this, Lola. They will not get away with tarnishing our name." Yet, deep in Lola's heart, a small, persistent whisper warned her that Hensley's cruel game might be only the beginning of an even larger battle for justice. Lola Harrison's phone buzzed relentlessly with cruel messages from strangers calling her a fake and a troublemaker, each notification adding to the weight of silence that now felt heavier than the noise. She had clung to the crowd's support as a shield earlier that day, but Captain Hensley had twisted that support against her, with a few manipulated frames that painted her in a false, dangerous light. Then Carla burst into the room, her face drained of color. "Sir, the pilots' union just released a statement," she said in a trembling voice. "They're backing Hensley. They claim Lola is a liar and that you pressured security to let her go. They're demanding an investigation." Marcus Harrison froze, his hand hovering over his phone. Lola's heart sank as the room spun. The union, a wall of hundreds of pilots with power and influence, was siding with the man who had shattered her prize drone, cuffed her, and destroyed her hopes, all for reasons steeped in racism and arrogance. "I can't believe they would do that," Lola whispered, her voice small and laden with dread as her father's eyes hardened. Marcus turned sharply, his face contorting with resolve as he motioned for Carla. "Call the lawyers, we're hitting back hard." In that moment, the safety Lola had felt just hours ago vanished, replaced by creeping fear as Marcus stepped out to face the press, leaving her alone in the glass-walled suite. The twisted video of her, looping in her mind, transformed her victory into a venomous lie, with hashtags and headlines branding her a threat. It felt as if every cheer of support had turned to static, poisoning her spirit. 2 days later, Lola stepped off the school bus with her backpack slung over one shoulder. The haunting chaos at O'Hare was a distant nightmare, yet the sting of Hensley's smear campaign still chased her from the airport to her quiet Chicago suburb. She had spent the weekend holed up in Marcus's suite, dodging hateful texts as he vowed to fight back. Now, on a gray Monday morning, as she adjusted her hoodie and tucked her braids neatly away, Lola tried to blend into the familiar corridors of her middle school, a place she once considered her safe haven. As she walked down the noisy hallway filled with slamming lockers and echoing sneakers, whispers trailed her like dark smoke. "That's her, the airport girl. Heard she's trouble," they murmured. Lola's stomach knotted, but she squared her shoulders, recalling the brutal memory of Hensley's boot crushing her meticulously built drone and the vicious pinch of the zip ties. Reaching her locker and fumbling with the dial, a shadow loomed over her. Principal Grayson, a wiry man with thinning hair and a tie too tight, called out sharply, "Lola Harrison, my office. Now!" The entire hallway fell silent as students fumbled with their phones. Dragged through a blur of stairs, Lola entered Grayson's stuffy office, where the smell of stale coffee and old paper hung heavy in the air. With a final click of the door, Grayson pointed to a creaking chair. "Sit," he ordered flatly. Before Lola could muster a plea, Grayson leaned forward, tapping his desk in judgment. "We've had complaints. Parents saw that video and the news. They're saying you're a safety risk. I'm suspending you immediately." The words hit like a sucker punch. "Suspended? For what?" "That video is fake," Lola protested, her braids falling loose as she pleaded. "My dad is suing this. I didn't do anything wrong." But Grayson's eyes remained cold. "Perception is enough. Disruptions cannot be tolerated," he declared as he slid a suspension notice across the desk. Anger flared inside Lola as she snatched her bag and stormed out, the door banging behind her. Outside, as she walked through the hall with whispers and snickers following her, Lola's heart pounded in defiance despite the overwhelming odds. Later that day, back home and pacing a silent living room, a knock at the door brought Ms. Carter, her determined guidance counselor with warm brown skin. "I heard what happened," Ms. Carter said firmly, her coat still dripping from the drizzle. "Principal Grayson is wrong. Let's fix this." Sitting together at the kitchen table, with records and witness statements spread out like fragile armor, Lola recounted her story while Ms. Carter called Grayson to demand her reinstatement. An hour later, Grayson's grudging voice accepted the appeal, and Lola returned to school, head held high, her spirit momentarily mended. Yet as she stepped into her classroom, a new shock awaited. A group of angry parents outside, brandishing signs that screamed, "She's dangerous, keep our kids safe." The venom of Hensley's lies had turned her safe space into a battlefield, and Lola wondered with a heavy heart how far this relentless hatred would reach next. The protest at school still echoed in Lola Harrison's mind, every hateful sign and every angry chant replaying like a nightmare that had turned her safe haven into a battleground. She had trudged home alone in the drizzle, her hoodie soaked and her victory over Principal Grayson tainted by the deep betrayal of Hensley's union, which had twisted her community against her with venomous lies. At home, the silence was oppressive until Marcus burst through the door in his rumpled navy suit, his bald head shining with sweat and his brown eyes ablaze with fury. "Lola, you okay?" he demanded, pulling her into a quick, desperate hug. Though she nodded to his question, the weight of the day's insults clung to her like a shadow. "They hate me, Dad. The parents, the kids. It's worse than at the airport," she whispered, voice trembling. Marcus's jaw tightened into a determined line. He had spent the entire day at O'Hare fighting the union's baseless allegations, and now this latest assault on Lola's character was the final straw. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and barked at Carla to get the lawyers on the line immediately. "We are suing Hensley and that union for defamation, harassment, everything we can muster. Tonight," he declared, each word pounding like a gavel on injustice. Lola watched as her father paced the kitchen, his polished shoes clicking resolutely on the floor. "They've gone too far," he murmured, half to himself. Despite her fear, a flicker of hope ignited inside her as she saw the fire in his eyes. Soon enough, a 50-page lawsuit was filed, accusing Hensley of libel, emotional distress, and racial profiling, with the union named as the orchestrator of the school protest. By morning, headlines blared that the CEO was suing a pilot over his daughter's harassment, and supportive comments slowly began to replace the venom that had once filled her phone. Relieved by the news, Lola took a long, hot shower, letting the steam wash away the grime of the past days, and headed to school with a renewed sense of determination. However, as she stepped off the bus, the air felt heavy with foreboding. Whispers followed her through the bustling hallway, calling her the airport girl and a troublemaker. She clutched her backpack tightly, recalling the sting of Hensley's boot crushing her carefully built drone, but pressed on with her head high. Before reaching her locker, Principal Grayson's stern call echoed down the corridor. "Lola Harrison, my office now." The words sent a shudder through her as she was marched into his outdated, stuffy office where the stale scent of old coffee lingered. Without a trace of empathy, Grayson slammed a suspension notice onto the desk. "We've received complaints. Parents are worried about you." "I'm suspending you effective immediately," he declared, dismissing her pleas that the video was doctored and that her father was suing to clear her name. Barely able to contain her anger and heartbreak, Lola stormed out into the cold, her world crumbling with each step. In that grim moment, as she clutched the folder like a shield and memories of injustice surged through her, her determination solidified. She would not allow Hensley to win. Even as her school turned hostile and the protest outside grew louder, she vowed silently. Their next move would be nothing short of a spectacular reckoning, one that would leave the enemy's lies in tatters and restore her name to the truth. Lola Harrison ducked instinctively as shards of glass rained down on the battered SUV, her hands frantically shielding her face while her heart pounded in terror. Her father, Marcus Harrison, twisted around to cover her with his arm, his voice slicing through the chaos as he commanded her to stay down. Every impact of a brick, every deafening crunch as another brick slammed onto the hood and shattered a window, reverberated through the tense night like the pounding of a furious drum. The SUV rocked violently with each hit, while fists pounded on its doors and hateful slurs rang out from the approaching mob. They screamed, "Go back where you came from," and "thieving scum." Words that cut deeper than any physical blow, and confirmed that the carnage was not random but orchestrated by Captain Hensley's venomous lies. Marcus's mind raced as he struggled to get the engine gunned into reverse, but the mob had quickly encircled the vehicle, forming a human cage that left them trapped. Out of the mass of masked figures, one man with wild eyes wielded a bat and smashed it against the tailgate, sending shockwaves through the metal frame. Panic surged in Lola, but even as fear gripped her, a spark of brilliant resolve ignited inside her. She remembered that tucked inside her backpack was a small drone remote, a remnant of her earlier projects, and a lifeline that might just turn the tide. "Dad, I've got an idea," she managed to say in a shaky but determined voice. Marcus's eyes widened in recognition of her plan. Without wasting a second, Lola yanked the remote free. A small black box with a red button that had been wired to ping O'Hare's security system from one of her earlier experiments. With trembling fingers yet a firm resolve, she pressed the button as hard as she could, sending a discreet but potent signal slicing through the night air like a silent scream for help. Marcus allowed himself a brief, proud smile even amid the chaos, knowing that his daughter's quick thinking could be the key to their survival. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as the mob's raucous shouts and furious pounding filled the air, until finally, sirens wailed in the distance with a promise of imminent rescue. Red and blue lights flashed through the now cracked windshield as security trucks roared up, their tires screeching against the wet asphalt. The masked figures halted in their tracks, then scattered like frightened rats, melting into the shadows cast by the nearby parking garage. Guards in high-visibility vests leapt from the trucks, batons drawn, swiftly chasing down the stragglers. As the SUV slowed to a stop in a deserted side lot, Marcus exhaled a long-held breath, still gripping the wheel of the battered vehicle. "You okay?" he asked hoarsely, and Lola nodded, clutching the remote like it were a treasure and her lifeline in this nightmare. In that moment of temporary reprieve, a rush of triumph surged through Lola. She had outsmarted their attackers with her own technology, turning a brick-throwing mob into a retreating mass of shadowy figures. Marcus immediately called his legal team, his voice steadier now as he demanded footage of the assault be secured. Outside, cameras captured every moment on cell phones and professional gear. Headlines flashed on news feeds. CEO sues pilot over daughter's harassment, and Hensley's mob turns violent. Supportive comments began to trickle in on social media, and for a brief instant it seemed as if justice was on their side. But just as hope was beginning to bloom, Lola's phone lit up with a new notification that sent chills down her spine. It was an anonymous post, time-stamped mere minutes ago, that boldly printed her home address with the caption, "Time for justice, finish what we started," followed by stark photos of her house and her bedroom window taken from the street. The message made it clear: Hensley was not finished. His lies had taken on a new, more personal dimension. The triumphant feeling quickly soured into dread. Marcus's face darkened as he saw the post, and he slammed the steering wheel in fury. "He's doxing us," he growled, his voice a mix of anger and terror as he immediately dialed security. "Get a team to my house now, lock it down." His eyes met Lola's, fierce yet pained, as he declared, "We're moving you somewhere safe. This ends today." In a rapid flurry, guards escorted them from the wrecked SUV into another car as they sped away from the chaos at O'Hare. The press conference that was scheduled to clear their names was now forgotten amid the new threat. Outside the car, the city blurred by into a mosaic of grays and shadows as they drove through the early morning haze of Chicago. Every passing moment reminded Lola that while she had managed to stop the mob on the road with her ingenuity, Hensley's hate was far from over. It had found its new mark in their own home, a place that was supposed to be their sanctuary. They soon pulled into a hotel parking lot, and the building's marble lobby provided a temporary fortress from the storm outside. Marcus checked them in with quiet urgency as he instructed the guards to double the patrols. "I want that house locked down tight," he demanded, voice resolute. Lola sat in a small, cramped room with beige walls that seemed to close in around her. Her sketches of new drone designs, tucked safely in her backpack, were all she had left from the normal life she once knew. But even in that confined space, she could not shake the feeling that Hensley's shadow had followed her every step. The following morning, as dull rain gave way to a bleak day, Marcus drove Lola to a courthouse, a gray, imposing stone building downtown with steps slick from overnight rain. Their lawsuit against Hensley was their chosen weapon, a chance to finally crush his malicious lies and prove their innocence. Lola, dressed in a navy dress hastily chosen by Marcus and wearing uncomfortable flats, clutched her backpack and walked into the courtroom with trembling determination. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension, the polished wood of the benches and the relentless rustling of reporters' notepads filling the air with an electric expectancy. Marcus sat resolutely beside her in the courtroom as their lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Torres, presented their case. Every detail was laid out: the drone they had built, the brutal arrest, the angry mob. Every shred of evidence was assembled to expose Hensley for the racist bully he truly was. Lola's heart pounded as Miss Torres called on her best friend Lila, who had been with her from the start. Lila took the stand, voice trembling at first, before gaining strength as she testified that Lola was not the threat that the manipulated video had painted her to be. "Lola is the smartest person I know," Lila said, her voice breaking with emotion as she recalled how Lola had always been there for her since 3rd grade, sharing smiles and dreams even in the toughest times. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, nodded as he absorbed every word. The room buzzed with the murmur of reporters and onlookers. Lila's testimony acted as a turning shield, protecting Lola as public opinion slowly began to sway in their favor. Marcus's eyes softened with a hint of hope as he listened to the supportive words, and in that moment, it seemed as though all the injustice might finally be undone. However, just as relief began to settle over them, fate struck a new, cruel blow. After the courtroom session had ended with the judge promising a ruling soon, Lola and Marcus returned to their hotel for what they hoped would be a moment of calm. Late that night, while Lola lay on the edge of a stiff hotel bed, surrounded by her sketches, her dreams of a fresh start stirred, even as sleep eluded her. Her phone rang out, shrill and unforgiving. Marcus answered quickly, but his face turned ashen when he received the news. "Drugs found in your locker?" His voice snapped, laden with disbelief and anger. He explained that Lila's father had confessed that Captain Hensley had blackmailed him into planting the drugs as part of a smear campaign. a final desperate move to ruin Lola and her family. The words hung in the air like poison. Lola's breath caught in her throat, the room tilting as her world crumbled once again. Marcus, his eyes dark with determination, looked at her and said softly, "We proved Hensley's lies with the footage, but he is playing dirty. We will fight this. I promise you, we will turn every lie against him." His voice, though resolute, trembled with the weight of the new charges that threatened to topple everything he had worked for. In that moment, Lola's heart ached with a mixture of guilt and defiance, knowing that this scandal was not her fault, but an attack launched by a man consumed with hate and cruelty. Her mind raced as she contemplated the looming battles ahead. How many more blows would she have to endure before true justice prevailed? Yet, even as the fear and sorrow mingled within her, a tiny ember of hope remained. She looked to Marcus, whose face was lined with stress and fear, and squeezed his hand as if to transfer some of his strength into her. They spent the early morning hours huddled over legal documents and frantic phone calls. As Marcus coordinated with his legal team, his voice rising and falling in measured tones, determined to fight back against every false accusation. Outside, the press continued to churn out headlines, but inside that modest hotel room, in the quiet moments between legal strategies, Lola clung fiercely to the belief that the truth would eventually win. As dawn broke over Chicago, the city bathed in a weak light. Marcus and Lola prepared to attend another press conference at O'Hare, determined to clear her name once and for all. With each step they took towards justice, every whispered promise between father and daughter, and every shared memory of the better days, they resolved that Hensley's cruelty would not define them. Even now, with new charges casting dark clouds over their hard-won victories, Marcus's words echoed powerfully. "We will fight. Together, we will expose his lies and reclaim our lives." Lola sat in silence as the SUV rolled toward the courthouse once more, her thoughts a tangled mix of sorrow and defiant hope. The battle had grown fiercer, the stakes higher, but she knew in her heart that no amount of hate could ever extinguish the light within her. With Marcus's unwavering presence and the support of those who truly knew her, she was ready to face the world, even if it meant once again standing tall against the relentless onslaught of injustice and racism. Lola Harrison's heart pounded like a runaway train as she ducked, shielding her face from shards of glass that rained down with the force of a sledgehammer. Outside the battered SUV, chaos reigned. Marcus Harrison, her steadfast father, twisted sharply to cover her with his arm, his voice sharp and commanding over the din. "Stay down!" he roared as another brick crashed into the hood, denting it with a sickening crunch. A third brick slammed into the window, sending splinters flying like cruel confetti. The SUV rocked violently, and angry voices erupted from the mob that had gathered around them. Fists pounded on the doors while hateful slurs, accusations like "go back where you came from" and "thieving scum" cut through the night air, each word a barb that confirmed what Lola had feared. This brutal onslaught was not random, but the direct result of Captain Hensley's vicious lies and racial hatred. Marcus fought to start the engine, his hands steady despite the fury in his eyes, but the mob had encircled them, forming a human cage that left them utterly trapped. Amid the chaos, a masked man swung a bat violently against the tailgate, the impact reverberating through the SUV's metal frame. Lola's mind raced in terror until she remembered the small drone remote tucked away in her backpack. A remnant of her passion for robotics and a silent beacon of hope amid the clamor and brutal strikes, she managed to call out, "Dad, I've got an idea." Her voice, though shaky, carried a spark of determination. Marcus's eyes widened as Lola fumbled for the remote, a small black device with a prominent red button that she had once wired to the airport security system as a school project. With trembling yet resolute fingers, she pressed the button, sending a covert signal into the night. In an instant, the distant sound of sirens began to rise, a promise of impending rescue. Marcus allowed himself a rare smile of pride, even as he maintained his grip on the wheel. The red and blue flashing lights of security trucks burst onto the scene, their tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The masked attackers paused, then scattered like frightened rodents as uniformed guards leaped from the trucks, batons in hand, chasing down the remnants of the mob. Relief washed over both of them when the guards secured the area and the SUV was freed from its temporary prison. Marcus immediately contacted his legal team, his voice now steady and determined as he demanded that every grain of video footage from the assault be collected. Outside, cell phone cameras and professional recorders captured every harrowing moment. Headlines soon began to flicker across news feeds. CEO sues pilot over daughter's harassment, and Hensley's mob turned violent in latest attack. As supportive comments started to trickle in online, Lola allowed herself a brief moment of triumph, until her phone buzzed with a new notification that sent a shiver down her spine. An anonymous post now bore her home address, boldly captioned with "Time for justice, finish what we started." Attached to the post were photos, grainy yet unmistakable, of her house and her bedroom window. The realization struck her like a punch to the gut. Marcus's face darkened instantly as he read the post. "He's doxing us," he growled, slamming his hand against the dashboard. "Get a team to my house now and lock it down." His tone left no room for argument. This was a new level of personal attack orchestrated by Hensley himself. With a heavy heart, Marcus informed Lola, "We're moving you somewhere safe. This ends today." Guards promptly escorted them from the wrecked SUV into another car, their familiar sanctuary now compromised by the lingering threat of Hensley's hate. They sped away from the chaos at O'Hare as the press conference to clear their names was abruptly abandoned. The city's skyline blurred past in the early morning haze as they traveled, both father and daughter acutely aware that while the immediate danger had passed, Hensley's sinister influence was far from over. Their home, a place they had once taken refuge in, had now become a target, a beacon for his malice. After a frantic journey, they pulled into a hotel parking lot. The hotel's marble-clad lobby, cool and quiet in stark contrast to the mayhem outside, served as a temporary fortress. Marcus checked them in with urgency while instructing the guards to double the patrols. "I want that house locked down tight," he ordered, his voice imbued with unyielding resolve. In a modest room with beige walls that felt more like a confinement than a safe haven, Lola clutched her backpack. Inside, her sketches of new drone designs were all that remained of her hope for a fresh start. Yet the feeling of safety eluded her. Every shadow now seemed a lurking threat. The next morning, under a sky muted by rain, Marcus drove Lola to a courthouse, a solemn gray stone structure in the heart of downtown, its steps slick from overnight rains. The lawsuit against Captain Hensley was now their main weapon, a chance to crush his defamatory lies and restore Lola's dignity. Dressed in a navy dress hastily chosen by Marcus and uncomfortable flats that pinched her toes, Lola walked into the courtroom with a determination that belied her 12 years. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with tension, the polished wood of the benches, the murmur of reporters, and a palpable sense of anticipation in every whispered conversation. Marcus sat firmly beside her as their lawyer. Ms. Torres, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, presented their case. Every detail was laid bare. The construction of the drone, the violent arrest, the terror on that fateful night, and the calculated lies spread by Hensley and his cronies. Lola's chest tightened as Ms. Torres called on her best friend Lila to testify. Lila, whose curly hair and kind eyes had been a source of strength since their early days together, took the stand. Her voice, though shaking at first, grew strong and clear as she recounted, "Lola is not the threat. She's the smartest, bravest person I know. I was with her from the beginning and saw everything." Lila's testimony was a lifeline, a shield against the vicious narrative spun by Hensley. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, nodded slowly as he absorbed every word. The room buzzed with the energy of hope and vindication, and for a moment it seemed as if justice might finally prevail. Yet no sooner had this feeling taken root than fate struck another cruel blow. After the courtroom session ended with the judge promising a ruling soon, Marcus and Lola returned to their hotel, hoping for a moment of reprieve. Instead, late that night, while Lola lay on the edge of the bed surrounded by her scattered sketches, a shrill phone call shattered the fragile calm. Marcus answered quickly, but as he listened, his face drained of color. "Drugs, found in your locker," he snapped, his voice a mix of disbelief and fury. He explained that Lola's father had confessed to being blackmailed by Hensley, who coerced him into planting evidence to frame Lola. Words fell upon Lola like a curse. It was another calculated move to ruin her reputation, a final, desperate assault to undermine all their progress. Marcus's eyes burned with steely determination even as despair threatened to overwhelm him. "We proved Hensley's lies with the footage, but now he is playing dirty. We will fight this every step of the way," he vowed, though his voice trembled with the weight of their new predicament. The revelation struck Lola hard. The betrayal of a trusted friend and the relentless targeting from Hensley left her feeling shattered and isolated. In a surge of both anger and resolve, she rallied her classmates that very afternoon, using a burner phone Marcus had given her. "Meet me at the park, we're fighting back," she texted in a moment of defiant clarity. A dozen friends gathered under the mighty oaks, their faces hard with determination as they chanted for justice. They screamed that Hensley had twisted the truth, that Lila's father had been forced into silence, and that they would not stand for being framed as troublemakers. The protest grew louder and fiercer until parents joined in, swaying public opinion until even Principal Grayson had to relent and lift Lola's suspension by noon the following day. Lola's spirit lifted momentarily as she embraced her friends in the park, feeling as though she had reclaimed her rightful place. Yet that night, her burner phone buzzed with a new alert. The school's entire system had been hacked, grades scrambled, servers down, and a message had been pinned to her name falsely declaring that Kiana Brooks did this. The false narrative spread rapidly, turning cheers into whispers of doubt among her classmates. Marcus immediately pulled up the breach on his laptop, his face grim with fury. "Hensley's work," he stated bitterly. "He's got a tech guy pinning the blame on you." The news exploded online, with headlines proclaiming "Student hacks school after drug bust" and messages questioning her integrity. Her victory in the park felt like ashes slipping through her fingers as the support evaporated. Desperate, Lola sank onto her bed in the modest hotel room, her drawings and sketches now symbols of a dream that was slipping away. But even in her darkest moment, Marcus's voice cut through the despair as he knelt beside her. "We will trace it, prove it was him," he promised, though his eyes betrayed the strain he felt. Determined not to let Hensley win, Lola used her own technical skills from Robotics Club to dig through the digital chaos. Late into the night, she pieced together lines of code from Hensley's sloppy work. Her nimble fingers danced over the keyboard until she uncovered a leaked email from Hensley's burner account, bragging about orchestrating the school breach to tarnish her reputation. With a surge of triumph, she uploaded the email to a public forum under the title, "Hensley's Lies Exposed." The post exploded by morning, garnering thousands of views and overwhelming support from strangers who saw her struggle and believed in her innocence. Over breakfast, as Marcus scrolled through the comments on his phone, a smile broke through his exhaustion. "You did it, baby girl," he said proudly. With renewed strength, they called in their PR team and arranged a press conference at O'Hare, arriving in a sleek sedan now flanked by guards. Reporters swarmed as Marcus, with his arm protectively around Lola, declared, "My daughter has been targeted by a racist bully, and this email proves Captain Hensley is behind every lie." Lola stepped forward, her navy dress slightly wrinkled, but her chin held high. "He hacked my school, framed me. I am not the threat, he is," she stated boldly, her voice resonating through the terminal as the crowd roared in support. Just when it seemed their triumph was complete, The terminal's giant screens began to flicker and go dark, one by one. Alarms blared and chaos erupted as travelers froze in confusion. Marcus quickly stormed to a nearby security desk, demanding answers as control towers confirmed a total shutdown. A guarded voice informed them that all flights were now grounded. In the ensuing pandemonium, a slick union statement emerged, falsely blaming Marcus for the crisis. With social media exploding with demands to fire him and blame shifting rapidly, Lola's heart sank as her hard-won triumph was once again challenged. Yet, with the resilience forged through months of injustice, Lola grabbed Marcus's arm. "I can fix this. I know these systems," she said firmly, her determination cutting through the roar of chaos. Marcus hesitated only a moment before nodding. Lola bolted to a nearby control room where guards cleared the way. Using every bit of skill she had honed over her years in robotics, she dove into the network's depths and swiftly found the kill switch hidden within Hensley's digital sabotage. Her fingers moved expertly over the keys as she restored system functions one by one. Slowly, the screens flickered back to life, and calm began to return as flights resumed and reporters gasped at her announcement. Outside, the terminal erupted in cheers. Reporters captured every moment as Marcus and Lola emerged triumphant. She, a 12-year-old genius who had undone Hensley's dark plot, and he, the determined CEO who had fought for his daughter's honor. As the press conference reconvened, Marcus announced, "We have restored order and exposed the criminal lies of Captain Hensley." Lola stood tall beside him, her eyes shining with the hard-won light of victory as she declared, "I will always stand for the truth. I am not the villain." Though the journey had been fraught with betrayal, violence, and relentless attacks that ranged from physical assault to digital sabotage, Lola Harrison emerged as a beacon of resilience against hate and injustice. In that moment, with the terminal buzzing back to life and the world finally witnessing her strength, it was clear no amount of hatred could drown the spirit of a girl who was too determined to be silenced. Lola Harrison had thought that her hard-won victories were turning the tide, that her brilliance had finally outsmarted the racist attacks of Captain Hensley and his relentless union. For a moment, she'd allowed herself to believe it was a real win, a victory over injustice that had threatened her family's honor and her own future. Her father, Marcus Harrison, had rallied his legal team with a fierce determination as he commanded, "We've got him now. Push the email, the fix, all of it." Lola's sketches, safely tucked in her bag, represented a promise of more breakthroughs to come. She had beaten him at his own game, saving her father's airport and rescuing their family name from the murk of Hensley's lies. But then, like a sledgehammer to her heart, the blow landed swift and brutal. Her burner phone buzzed again, and an official union press release popped up, cold and calculated. "Due to Marcus Brooks's failure, we're striking. All pilots walk out at midnight." Her stomach dropped, and the room tilted as Marcus scrambled through his phone, scrolling frantically. "They're blaming me," he said in a hollow tone, his voice betraying the shock of the accusation. His words cut deep, and it became painfully clear. The terminal's staff began whispering, travelers groaning as delays piled up. By nightfall, picket lines had formed outside, a sea of pilots in high-visibility vests chanting in unison while thousands of passengers were stranded and baggage piled high. The chaos dwarfed everything Lola had fixed just hours before. Marcus's strong voice soon filled the quiet moments that followed. He sat with her, his hands clenched under his gray jacket as he confided, "They used your fix to twist the knife." The weight of the strike was crushing, despite her triumph in stopping the shutdown and saving the airport's systems. Hensley's union had turned her innovative solution into their weapon. Travelers glared and muttered as they passed by, with some even openly yelling, "This is your fault!" Their anger mirrored the union's vicious lies, and Lola felt her once bright hope fray into a hollow echo of defeat. The night stretched endlessly as the strike locked O'Hare in gridlock, planes forced to remain silent on the tarmac while the terminal transformed into a ghost town of stranded souls. Marcus tried to steady himself over the phone with his lawyers, But Lola could only stare out the window as city lights blurred by unshed tears. She had saved the systems, proved her worth, only for Hensley to turn it all against them. A master manipulator, twisting every win into a new loss. The Union's chants, harsh and echoing, sank deeply into her bones as she questioned how one man could keep turning every victory into a devastating defeat. Desperate for reprieve, Lola found herself in a cramped hotel safe house on the edge of Chicago. Her navy dress hung wrinkled on a chair and her flats were scuffed from the journey. Her treasured sketches lay scattered across the bed, a lifeline to the dreams she once nurtured. The clock ticked past midnight, and the hotel room felt oppressively dark, save for a sliver of streetlight that cut through the blinds. She had fought off thugs, fixed the shutdown, and even saved her father's airport, only for Hensley to strike back with a vengeance that left her family's honor in tatters. The safe house, meant to be a sanctuary, now hummed with the distant noise of picket lines and the bitter reality that their troubles were far from over. Before dawn, her heart raced as the silence was shattered by a thud against the door. Lola crouched in the corner of the hotel bathroom, the cold tile pressing against her knees as she clutched her burner phone with sweaty fingers. Through the narrow gap of the door, she could hear muffled voices and the heavy thumping of boots. In a single, horrifying moment, the door burst open, splintering inward and sending wooden shards flying. 3 dark figures in black hoods stormed in. Panic surged through her, but before she could scream, a gloved hand yanked her up roughly. A gruff voice barked, "Got her," as one of them, his breath hot through his mask, muttered orders into his radio. In the ensuing chaos, Lola kicked out with her scuffed flats as best she could. She managed to tear off the cloth that had been clamped over her mouth, her vision blurring as they dragged her from the room. The world spun violently and then, abruptly, she woke in the back of a van. The engine's rumble a constant reminder of her peril. Her wrists were bound with rough rope, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of gasoline and sweat. 2 men sat up front now, their faces obscured by masks. One bore a scar slicing through his cheek, while the other had a buzz cut adorned with a snake tattoo. A third man, crouched nearby, checked her ropes with a knife that glinted in the low light as he muttered, "Boss says keep her quiet." Lola's pulse hammered in her ears. In a haze of terror and determination, she remembered the shard, a jagged piece from her old drone's frame that she had kept for luck, and a plan began to form. With trembling fingers, she inched her bound hands toward the shard. The ropes were tight but not unbreakable. The van lurched as it turned through city streets, and as the men in front became distracted by their conversation about a drop point, Lola's adrenaline surged. Her fingers brushed the sharp edge, and she gripped it tightly, sawing at the frayed fibers of her bindings. One rope, then another began to give way. In a desperate burst of strength, she lunged forward and slammed the shard into the thigh of one of her captors. The man grunted in pain, his hold faltering as Lola snatched the knife from the ground and sliced through the remaining rope binding her wrists. Without waiting, she kicked open the van's back door. Just as the vehicle swerved sharply, she tumbled onto the wet pavement, knees scraping and flats pounding on the slick asphalt. With headlights flaring and horns blaring, she bolted into a narrow alleyway, her heart pounding in her ears even as shouts and pounding boots echoed behind her. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She ran blindly, driven by fear and determination, until she found a rusted payphone. Fumbling with coins, she dialed Marcus's number with a trembling voice. His relieved yet urgent tone crackled back, instructing her to stay put as he dispatched guards to her location. Moments later, her father arrived in a sedan, and as guards surrounded her, Marcus pulled her into a tight embrace. "You're safe now," he whispered, checking her cuts and soot-covered wrists. Clutching the shard still in her hand as proof of her desperate fight for survival, she managed to whisper, "They're Hensley's. They're Hensley's." Marcus's eyes burned with a fury that promised vengeance. "He's finished," he declared firmly as they drove off toward a new safe house. A modest brick home in a quiet suburb, guarded by a throng of security personnel and his team of lawyers. Inside the safe house, as Marcus raged on the phone with his legal team, Lola sank onto a worn couch with a blanket draped over her trembling form. Her body ached from every bruise and cut, and she stared at the shard lying on the table, a small token of the battle she had just fought, a symbol that she had in some measure outsmarted Hensley's vicious operatives. But before they could even begin to savor this victory, a booming explosion on the evening news shattered the fragile calm. Marcus's phone flashed a new alert, footage of an O'Hare hangar burning violently, with flames licking at its steel skeleton, while Lola's name and a picture of her innocent face appeared boldly in news headlines, accusing her of planting a bomb. "Terrorist," the headline screamed in stark red letters, and the report claimed that her actions were part of a revenge plot. Marcus cursed vehemently, slamming his phone down with disbelief as the news narrator declared that her supposed actions had caused the hangar explosion and that national security was now in jeopardy. The very word terrorist echoed through the safe house, turning what had been a hard-fought triumph into a crushing existential nightmare. Marcus's face turned ashen as he grabbed Lola's shoulders, his voice rising in defiance. "It's a lie, we'll prove it." However, as the television looped expert opinions linking her to the bomb and her previous acts of defiance, it felt as though every victory had been reversed. Marcus's legal team scrambled, and even the guards began to look uncertain. The safe house, once a fortress, now felt like a cage as the accusations piled on. "They're calling you a terrorist now, Lola," Marcus said, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. "Hensley's twisted every good deed we've done, turning your escape into a criminal act against our country." Lola's mind raced as she clutched the shard, its cold metal now a cruel reminder of how far Hensley was willing to go. Her dreams of rebuilding her drone, her school reputation, her very identity were all crumbling under the weight of these new lies. In the dim light of the safe house, with Marcus trying desperately to coordinate a counterattack, Lola's thoughts turned to her next move. She would not let Hensley destroy her or her father's legacy. Every injustice she had suffered, every insult, every slander would be answered. But how could a 12-year-old girl fight against such a monstrous campaign of hate? The pain of betrayal. Her best friend, Lola, coerced into silence. Her school turned against her, even her home placed in the crosshairs. Cut deeper than any physical injury. Gathering every scrap of courage, Lola resolved that their fight was far from over. "We will fix this," she promised in a quiet but determined whisper. Marcus, his eyes dark with resolve, though his voice shook with uncertainty, replied, "We'll expose him, show the world his true colors." The plan was set into motion once again. They would comb through every piece of evidence, every hacked file, every manipulated video. She would use her skills in robotics and code to trace back Hensley's deceit and unmask him once and for all. As the night wore on and the safe house's atmosphere thickened with tension, Marcus's phone continued to ring with urgent calls from his legal team and security advisors. The pain of the false bomb accusation, the national outcry that now painted Lola as a terrorist, and the viciousness of Hensley's relentless campaign of hate surged into a maelstrom of overwhelming despair. Yet, even as the safe house walls seemed to close in around them, Lola clutched the shard and vowed quietly that she would not be broken. The fight for her life, her reputation, and her family's honor had just entered a darker, more dangerous phase. A phase in which every step forward would demand blood and sweat and unyielding determination. In that moment, as the safe house's heavy doors locked and the distant sounds of protest and chaos mingled with the steady hum of Marcus's phone calls, Lola Harrison knew one thing for certain. She was not the villain in this story. Captain Hensley had turned every victory into a loss, every triumph into tragedy, but his cruelty would only forge her into something stronger. And as Marcus's voice softened with a mixture of hope and desperation, promising that they would fight until the truth prevailed, Lola's eyes shone with defiant tears. The nightmare was far from over, but with every ounce of her being, she vowed that one day soon, the world would see that the true villain was not her, a brave, brilliant girl with braids and a broken drone, but the man who had twisted her reality with his hate. A man who would one day face the wrath of justice as delivered by a daughter who refused to be silenced. Lola Harrison sat on the edge of a worn coffee table in the safe house, her muddy flats leaving dark stains on the rug as the television blared news of an O'Hare hangar bombing. Her name, once a symbol of hope and resilience, had been twisted into a synonym for terror. The jagged shard from her broken drone lay there, a cruel reminder of the night she fought off Hensley's thugs, a victory that now seemed like a distant memory, crushed under a new, devastating lie. Marcus Harrison stood by the window in his gray jacket, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he raged with his lawyers. "Find the source, it's Hensley. We've got hours before this buries us," he shouted as guards bolted the doors and radios crackled with urgent messages. Outside, sirens wailed while the city trembled, hunting a 12-year-old they now branded as a fugitive. Lola's braids hung loosely around her face, and her navy dress was torn at the hem from the desperate escape. Her hands trembled as she gripped her burner phone. She had fought off kidnappers and saved the airport's systems, but now a bomb was tied to her name. A bomb that could ruin everything her family had worked for. Marcus's face turned ashen as he knelt beside her, his voice cracking when he said, "They're saying you planted that bomb during the shutdown chaos. National security is at risk." His words cut deep into her heart. "It's not me," she whispered fiercely. "I know who did it." In a burst of determination, she recalled the skills she'd honed in robotics club and the secret network she had built online. "Dad, give me your laptop," she insisted. With her father's reluctant nod, she sat, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard. "I'm hacking Hensley's phone," she declared, her voice steady as she traced his digital footprint through weak firewalls. Minutes stretched as lines of green code flew past her eyes until she uncovered audio files. Hensley's gravelly voice, clear as day, confessing to setting a bomb at Hangar 6 and pinning it on her. Her breath caught. This was the irrefutable proof they needed. Marcus's eyes widened with a mixture of horror and pride as he growled, "That's him! We've got him!" Lola immediately uploaded the incriminating files to her public forum and then went live on stream. Her face filled the screen, her braids wild and her eyes fierce. "This is Lola Harrison," she proclaimed. "Hensley bombed O'Hare, not me. Here's my proof." Within minutes, her live stream exploded with views and supportive messages. Newsrooms pivoted, anchors stumbled over the new evidence, and the once accused girl transformed into a champion of truth. Reporters swarmed as Marcus and Lola, now united in victory, addressed the press outside the terminal. "My daughter is a hero," Marcus announced proudly, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "Hensley is the criminal, and we've got the proof." But just as triumph filled the air, a new alert shattered the moment. A manifesto, ominously posted from a jail server, declared, "I'll burn this city for what they did to me." The safe house's quiet shattered with the roar of unrest, and the world outside erupted into chaos. Although guards were scrambling and Marcus's legal team rushed to trace the source, Lola's heart sank as the nightmare seemed to restart. The victory she had fought so hard for was now tainted by further lies, and the fight for survival was far from over. Lola Harrison's journey had reached a critical moment. In the dim safe house, her muddy flats left dark stains on the rug as the TV blared images of an O'Hare hangar in flames. Her name, once a symbol of hope and resilience, had been twisted into a synonym for terror by those who despised her. The jagged shard from her broken drone lay on the coffee table like a cruel reminder of the night she fought off Hensley's thugs, a triumph that now felt like it belonged to a bygone era. Marcus stood by the window in his gray jacket, phone pressed tightly to his ear as he raged at his lawyers. "Find the source. It's Hensley. We've got hours before this buries us," he shouted while guards bolted the doors and radios crackled with urgent messages. Outside, sirens wailed, and the city trembled as officials hunted a 12-year-old they now branded as a fugitive. In that tense moment, Lola's braids hung loose and her navy dress was torn at the hem, evidence of a desperate escape. Her hands trembled as she clutched her burner phone, still warm from the chaos. She had fought off kidnappers and saved O'Hare's systems, but now a bomb had been tied to her name, a bomb that threatened to destroy everything her family had built. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice cracking with both anger and sorrow. "They're saying you planted it during the shutdown chaos. They want to pin this on you, on us." His words cut deep, but Lola met his eyes with quiet ferocity. "It's not me," she said, her voice small but determined. "I know who did this." A spark of resolve ignited in Lola as she remembered her time spent honing her skills in robotics and her secret network of online activists. "Dad, give me your laptop," she urged. With his hesitant nod, she began hacking into Hensley's digital footprint. Lines of green code raced across the screen until she uncovered audio files, Hensley's own voice confessing clear as day to setting the bomb at Hangar 6 and framing her. Her heart pounded as she played the file, the confession filling the room with undeniable truth. Marcus's eyes widened, and with a guttural, triumphant growl, he declared, "That's him! We've got him!" Without hesitation, Lola uploaded the evidence to her public forum and went live on every platform. Her face filled the screen, no longer dressed up in a fancy outfit, but in a simple hoodie that showcased her raw determination. "This is Lola Harrison," she proclaimed, her voice steady and loud enough to cut through the chaos of the night. "Hensley bombed O'Hare and started these riots. I built drones, not bombs. I am not a criminal. Look at the proof." Her live stream spread like wildfire. Supportive messages poured in, and news anchors fumbled over their words as experts confirmed the authenticity of her files. The momentum shifted. Reporters swarmed the terminal and nearby areas as Marcus stood proudly at her side, announcing, "My daughter is a hero. Hensley is the criminal, and we now have the evidence." For a moment, it seemed as if the truth had finally prevailed, and the public rallied behind her with chants of hope rather than hate. But then, in an unexpected twist that made her blood run cold, her burner phone buzzed again with a manifesto posted from a jail server. The chilling message threatened to ignite nationwide riots, a final ruthless strike from a man she thought was defeated. As the safe house erupted in chaos once more, Marcus pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You saved us," he whispered, his voice filled with both pride and fear. "But this isn't over yet." Lola's eyes, though filled with defiant tears, burned with determination. "I will keep fighting," she vowed, her voice steady as she stared into the camera one last time. "This isn't the end, it's the start of our revolution against hate." Her words resonated like a battle cry, turning the tide of the night from despair to hope. And though the world outside raged with uncertainty, in that final moment, Lola Harrison stood as a beacon of courage, a young leader determined to dismantle injustice and rebuild a world where truth, not prejudice, reigned supreme.